When my 34-year-old son discovered I'd inherited $15 million from my late brother, his wife coldly whispered, "That senile old fool doesn't deserve that fortune. It belongs to us." They demanded I hand it all over, claiming they were more deserving. After 3 decades of endless sacrifice for their comfort, I realized it was time to teach them the brutal price of greed and betrayal. What unfolded next left them devastated and begging for mercy they'd never shown me. But before we dive into this shocking family drama, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from all over the United States. The antique grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 9 times, its deep bronze tones echoing through the silence of my modest 2-bedroom house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The December wind rattled my single-pane windows as I cleared away the remnants of our family Christmas dinner, the first one I'd hosted in my cramped dining room since my wife Eleanor passed away 8 years ago. My son Blake sat across from me, methodically folding his cloth napkin with the same precise movements he'd used as a child. His wife Vanessa lounged in her chair, scrolling through her phone with painted crimson nails, occasionally sighing with dramatic boredom. Their twin daughters, Lily and Rose, had fallen asleep on my worn couch after gorging themselves on the homemade apple pie I'd spent hours perfecting. "Dad, that turkey was incredible," Blake said, stacking the china plates I'd inherited from Eleanor's mother. "You really went all out this year." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the ancient space heater humming in the corner. For the first time in months, my son seemed genuinely present, not distracted by work calls or Vanessa's constant demands for attention. Maybe this Christmas would be different. Maybe we could finally reconnect the way Eleanor had always hoped. That's when disaster struck. As Blake reached for the crystal water glasses, the expensive set Eleanor had saved for decades to buy, his elbow knocked against my leather briefcase perched on the side table. The worn case tumbled to the hardwood floor with a thunderous crash, its brass latches springing open like a mouth gasping for air. Legal documents exploded across my dining room floor like a paper snowstorm. Official letterheads, notary stamps, and bold dollar amounts scattered everywhere. I lunged forward, my arthritic knees protesting as I dropped to the ground, desperately trying to gather the papers before anyone could read them. But I was too late. Blake's eyes had already found the document that would change everything. A probate settlement from Hartwell Associates, estate attorneys. The number at the bottom seemed to glow under the warm dining room chandelier. 15,247,000. Whoa. 15? Blake's voice cracked like ice breaking on a frozen pond. "Dad, is this real?" Vanessa's head snapped up from her phone, her predatory instincts immediately activated. She leaned forward in her chair, her green eyes narrowing as she tried to read the upside-down documents. "What's real, honey? What are you looking at?" I clutched the papers against my chest, my hands trembling with a mixture of embarrassment and something darker. A protective instinct I hadn't felt in years. "It's nothing you need to worry about," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in my own ears. Blake's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. $15 million, he whispered. "The inheritance from Uncle Harold. It's $15 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table beside her untouched slice of pie. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the calculating expression that spread across her angular features. "Harold?" she asked, her voice suddenly honey-sweet and dangerously soft. "Your brother who died last spring? The one who owned that tech company?" I nodded reluctantly, settling back into my chair with the documents now safely pressed against my chest. Harold built DataSync Solutions from nothing, started it in his garage in 1987, sold it to Microsoft 3 years ago for $47 million. He died of a heart attack 6 months later. Blake slumped in his chair as if someone had cut his strings. $47 million, and he left it all to you? Not all of it, I said carefully. Harold donated extensively to charity. set up college funds for children of his employees. But yes, I was his only living relative. The estate cleared probate last Friday. Vanessa's mask of suburban politeness was slipping, revealing something hungry and desperate underneath. That's life-changing money, Walter. What an incredible blessing for our family. The way she said, "our family," made my blood run cold. I'd heard that tone before, when she'd hinted about needing help with their mortgage, when she'd suggested I should downsize my house and give them the proceeds, when she'd complained that I was hoarding my modest retirement savings while they struggled with their self-imposed financial burdens. "It's a blessing for me," I corrected quietly. Harold left it to me. Blake was staring at his hands, his mind clearly racing. I could see him calculating, planning, scheming in the same way he'd calculated how to convince me to co-sign for his truck, his wife's SUV, their vacation loans that somehow never got repaid. "But Dad," he said slowly, meeting my eyes for the first time all evening, "you don't really need $15 million. I mean, at your age, what would you even do with it?" At my age. The words hit me like a slap across the face. 72 years old, and my own son was already writing my obituary, already dividing up my assets in his mind. "I haven't decided what to do with it yet," I said, measuring each word carefully. "The money just became available." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice taking on that manipulative sing-song tone she used when she wanted something. "But Walter, family should support each other. And with the girls to think about, their college funds, their future opportunities." She gestured toward my sleeping granddaughters, weaponizing my love for them with surgical precision. "Their college funds?" I raised an eyebrow. "The ones I've been contributing to for the past 8 years while you spent their education money on that Florida vacation and the kitchen renovation?" Blake's face flushed red. "That's not fair, Dad. We needed that trip. Vanessa was exhausted from her job at the salon and the kitchen was falling apart." Was it falling apart? Or did Vanessa want granite countertops like her sister has? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's green eyes flashed with barely controlled rage, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "We're not asking for charity, Walter. We're talking about family responsibility, about sharing blessings with the people who matter most." I set the documents on the table between us, my movements deliberate and controlled. The inheritance papers seemed to glow under the chandelier light, $15 million worth of temptation and greed made manifest. "And what kind of sharing did you have in mind?" I asked. Blake and Vanessa exchanged a look, quick, loaded with meaning, perfectly synchronized like dancers who'd rehearsed this routine. It was the same look they'd shared when they'd asked me to co-sign their mortgage, when they'd needed emergency money for Blake's gambling debts, when they'd convinced me to cash in my life insurance policy to pay for their wedding. "Well," Vanessa said, her voice taking on a reasonable, logical tone, "you're living in this tiny house, driving that old car, wearing the same clothes you've had for 20 years. You don't have expensive hobbies or travel plans. You live simply." "Unlike you," I said quietly. "We're young," Blake said, finding his voice again. "We have dreams, goals, opportunities. We could actually do something meaningful with that money. Start Blake's construction company, give the girls private school educations, maybe buy a house with enough room for you to live with us." The carrot and the stick perfectly deployed. The promise of family togetherness coupled with the subtle threat of continued separation if I didn't comply with their demands. "You want me to give you my brother's inheritance?" I said. It wasn't a question. "Not give," Vanessa said quickly. "Share. Invest in your family's future. Think about your legacy, Walter. Do you want to be remembered as the grandfather who hoarded his wealth while his family struggled?" I looked at my sleeping granddaughters, their innocent faces peaceful in the lamplight. Lily clutched a stuffed unicorn I'd bought her for her birthday. The one Vanessa had complained was too cheap compared to what the other kids in their neighborhood received. Rose wore a dress I'd sewn myself because Vanessa claimed they couldn't afford new clothes, despite posting photos of her latest designer purse collection on social media. I've been supporting this family for 34 years, I said, my voice growing stronger. I paid for Blake's college education while working 60-hour weeks. I co-signed loans you never repaid. I've given you over $300,000 in emergency help over the past decade. And we're grateful, Blake said weakly. But this is different. This is real money. Real money. As opposed to the fake money I'd been bleeding for 3 decades, apparently. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after the long day of cooking and entertaining. I think it's time you both went home. We can continue this conversation another time. Vanessa's mask finally slipped completely. Another time? Walter, we're talking about $15 million. This conversation doesn't wait for another time. Yes, it does. Her voice rose to a sharp pitch that woke both girls, who began crying simultaneously. You're being selfish and short-sighted. That money could transform our lives, give your granddaughters opportunities you never had. Opportunities I paid for with my opportunities, I shot back. Every dollar I put toward Blake's future was a dollar I didn't spend on myself, on Eleanor, on the life we could have had. Blake was on his feet now, his face flushed with anger and desperation. So this is punishment? Because I made mistakes when I was younger? This isn't punishment. This is me finally asking what you've ever done to deserve my brother's life's work. The question hung in the air like smoke. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to formulate an answer that didn't sound pathetic even to his own ears. Vanessa gathered the girls with sharp, angry movements. Fine, we'll go. But this conversation isn't over, Walter. Family doesn't abandon family, and that money belongs to all of us, whether you want to admit it or not. I walked them to the door, my steps heavy with 34 years of accumulated disappointment. Blake wouldn't meet my eyes as he carried sleeping Rose to their car. Vanessa strapped Lily into her car seat with violent efficiency, her movements sharp with barely contained fury. As their SUV pulled out of my driveway, the SUV I'd helped them buy, Vanessa rolled down her window. Her parting words cut through the December cold like a knife. That senile old fool doesn't deserve that fortune. It belongs to us, and we're going to get what's ours. I stood in my doorway long after their taillights disappeared, the winter wind cutting through my sweater. Inside my house, the grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking the end of what I'd hoped would be a peaceful Christmas evening. Instead, it marked the beginning of a war I never wanted but was finally prepared to fight. Sleep had abandoned me completely. I lay in my bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind replaying every word, every expression, every calculated look that had passed between Blake and Vanessa during our confrontation. The digital clock beside my bed cast in green glow across the darkness. 11:47 p.m. My modest house creaked and settled around me, the old bones of the structure adjusting to the December cold. Eleanor used to say the house talked to her at night, telling stories of all the families who had lived within these walls. Tonight, it seemed to whisper warnings. Then I heard it, voices drifting down from the guest bedroom above me. Blake and Vanessa had decided to stay the night rather than drive home with the girls, claiming it was too late and too cold for such a long trip. At the time, I'd thought it was considerate parenting. Now I realized it was strategic positioning. Their voices were muted through the thin ceiling, but the heating vents carried sound better than they should have in a house this old. I held my breath and strained to listen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. 15 million, Blake. $15 million, and he's acting like we asked him to donate a kidney. Vanessa's voice was sharp with frustration, no longer disguised by the honey-sweet tone she'd used downstairs. Maybe we pushed too hard tonight, Blake replied, his voice uncertain. You saw how he reacted when we brought up the money. Oh, please. Vanessa's footsteps paced across the creaky floorboards above my head. Your father has been selfish with money his entire life. Remember when we needed help with the mortgage last year? He acted like we were asking for the crown jewels instead of a simple loan. A loan they'd never repaid, I thought bitterly. A loan that had cost me my planned trip to visit Eleanor's grave in Savannah. The first vacation I'd considered taking in 8 years. He's not completely wrong, though, Blake said quietly. He has helped us out a lot over the years. Help? Vanessa's laugh was harsh and brittle. Blake, he's your father. Supporting his family isn't help, it's obligation. And now he's sitting on $15 million while his son struggles to make ends meet and his granddaughters go without. Go without? I pressed my ear closer to the heating vent. Those girls had more toys than a toy store, more clothes than they could wear, and more opportunities than I'd ever dreamed of at their age. What exactly were they going without? I just don't know how to convince him, Blake said. You saw how stubborn he got when we brought up sharing the money. Leave that to me, Vanessa replied, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. Men his age are easy to manipulate, especially when they're lonely and isolated. A little guilt about missing out on his granddaughters' lives, some tears about our financial struggles, maybe some concern about his mental state. Mental state. The words hit me like ice water in my veins. What do you mean by that? Blake asked. Think about it, honey. He's 72 years old, living alone in this falling down house, no social life, no hobbies. It wouldn't be hard to suggest that he's not thinking clearly about financial decisions, that maybe Harold somehow manipulated him, or that he's becoming susceptible to scams. I gripped the sheet so tightly my knuckles went white. She was talking about having me declared mentally incompetent. Vanessa, that seems extreme. $15 million is extreme, Blake. That's life-changing money for people who actually have lives to change. What's he going to do with it? Sit in this dump and count it until he dies? The casual cruelty of it knocked the breath out of my lungs. In Vanessa's mind, I was already dead, just a stubborn obstacle between her and a fortune she'd never earned. There are legal precedents, she continued, her voice taking on a more calculating tone. Adult children can petition for guardianship when elderly parents show signs of diminished capacity. We document his declining mental state, maybe get some statements from neighbors about concerning behavior. He seems pretty sharp to me, Blake protested weakly. He's 72 and living like a hermit. We play up the isolation, the eccentric behavior, maybe suggest some early dementia symptoms. Courts are very protective of elderly people's assets when there's evidence of mental decline. I felt physically sick. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were planning to strip away my independence, my dignity, my very identity as a competent human being. They wanted to turn me into a ward of the state, a helpless old man who needed their benevolent protection. But what if he fights it? Blake asked. With what? He doesn't have friends, doesn't socialize, barely leaves this house except for grocery shopping. Who's going to testify to his mental competency? His mailman? The bed creaked above me as one of them sat down. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was dreamy, almost hypnotic. Picture it, Blake. $15 million. We could pay off the house immediately, buy that lake property in Minnesota you've always wanted. The girls could go to private school, have tutors, take music lessons, learn languages. We could travel to Europe, see the world, actually live instead of just surviving. And Dad? We'd take care of him, obviously. Put him in a nice assisted living facility where he'd be safe and supervised. He'd probably be happier around people his own age instead of rattling around in this old house by himself. Assisted living. They wanted to warehouse me in some sterile facility where I'd spend my remaining years playing bingo and waiting to die, while they spent my brother's fortune on their selfish dreams. I don't know. Blake's voice was wavering, uncertain. Think about your daughters, Blake. Think about the opportunities we could give them. Private schools, college funds, maybe even graduate school. Do you want them to struggle the way we have? Do you want them to grow up in apartments and starter homes while their grandfather hoards millions? The manipulation was masterful. She was using Blake's love for his daughters as a weapon against his guilt about betraying his father. And it was working. When you put it that way, Blake said slowly, we deserve that money more than he does. Vanessa continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident. We're young. We have potential. We have dreams and goals. He's had his life. He made his choices. Now it's time for him to help secure his family's future instead of being a selfish old miser. Selfish old miser. The words cut deeper than a knife because they came from my own son's wife, spoken in my own house while she planned to destroy my life. "How long do you think we have?" Blake asked, and my heart stopped. How long until what? Until I died. Men his age don't usually last more than 10 years, Vanessa replied casually, as if she were discussing the weather. Probably less, given his lifestyle. He doesn't exercise, eats poorly, has no social connections. Isolation kills people faster than cancer. 10 years. In Vanessa's calculations, I had 10 years of life left, and even that seemed too long for her patience. "So what's our first step?" Blake asked, and with those words he sealed his fate. My son had chosen greed over loyalty, money over family, and his wife's manipulation over his father's sacrifice. "We start documenting everything," Vanessa said, her voice taking on a business-like efficiency. "I'll keep a journal of concerning behavior, take photos of the condition of this house, maybe record some conversations where he seems confused or disoriented. We build a case slowly, methodically. And if that doesn't work, it will work. Trust me, Blake. I know how to handle men like your father. He's been alone too long, gotten too set in his ways. A little pressure in the right places, and he'll crumble." The clock read 12:23 a.m. when their voices finally faded to whispers, then silence. I lay there in the darkness until dawn broke through my curtains, processing every word, every plan, every casual dismissal of my worth as a human being. By the time I heard them stirring above me around 7 a.m., something fundamental had changed inside me. The loving father who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful son was gone. The generous grandfather who had enabled their entitlement was dead. In their place sat someone much more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and 15 million reasons to fight back. I got up and made coffee with steady hands, my movements precise and methodical. As the rich aroma filled my kitchen, I sat at my small table and waited for them to come downstairs. They thought they were coming down to continue manipulating a confused old man. They were about to meet someone who had spent the night planning their destruction. The war they'd declared in the darkness above my head was about to begin in earnest, and they had no idea how outmatched they were. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor as I waited for my family to wake up. But I wasn't the same man who had hosted Christmas dinner 12 hours earlier. That generous, naive father had died sometime between midnight and dawn, replaced by someone harder, someone who finally understood that love without respect was just exploitation. I'd spent the sleepless hours before dawn making lists, the same methodical planning that had served me well during my 40-year career as a mechanical engineer. Problem identification, resource assessment, strategic planning, execution. Blake and Vanessa had made a critical error. They'd declared war on someone who built his career, solving complex problems under pressure. My first list cataloged 34 years of financial support, college tuition, living expenses, emergency loans, co-signed debts, mortgage assistance, car payments, medical bills, vacation funds, and 1,000 smaller emergencies that were never emergencies at all. Conservative estimate, $347,000 in direct support, not including interest on loans never repaid. My second list documented their lies and manipulations, claims of poverty while posting vacation photos on social media, requests for food money while buying designer clothes, unemployment claims while working under-the-table construction jobs. I had screenshots of everything, meticulously saved because some part of me had always known this day would come. My third list was shorter but more dangerous. Legal options, financial leverage, social consequences, and nuclear options I'd never wanted to consider. After last night's overheard conversation, all options were now on the table. I heard footsteps on the stairs, Vanessa's heels clicking against wood in a rhythm that suggested confidence, determination, and the belief that she was about to manipulate another lonely old man into submission. Blake's heavier tread followed, hesitant and guilty, but committed to his wife's plan. They entered my kitchen like actors taking their places on a stage. Vanessa had dressed carefully in a soft pink sweater that made her look vulnerable and maternal. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal and natural. She was costumed for the role of struggling young mother making a reasonable request. Blake avoided my eyes, his shoulders hunched with shame that wasn't quite strong enough to overcome his greed. He wore his best jeans and the button-down shirt I'd bought him for his last birthday, the one Vanessa had criticized as too plain when she'd seen the receipt. "Good morning, Walter," Vanessa said, her voice honey-sweet and carefully modulated. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" "Not really," I replied, gesturing toward the coffee pot. "Help yourselves." She poured 2 cups with graceful movements, adding cream and sugar with the precise motions of someone who'd rehearsed this performance. "This big old house must feel lonely sometimes, all these empty rooms, just you rattling around by yourself." The setup was so obvious I almost smiled. She was establishing my isolation, my loneliness, my vulnerability to manipulation. But I played along, curious to see how far she'd take it. "Sometimes," I agreed. Blake finally met my eyes, then quickly looked away. "Dad, about last night, maybe we came on a little strong, but you have to understand we're just thinking about the family's future." "Whose family?" I asked quietly. Vanessa's hand found Blake's arm in a gesture of wifely support. "All of us, Walter. We're all family here, and family takes care of each other, doesn't it?" "Does it?" I sipped my coffee and waited. She settled into the chair across from me, her posture perfect, her expression earnest and sincere. "We've been talking, and we want you to know that we're not asking for charity. We're talking about investment, about you investing in your son and granddaughter's futures." "What kind of investment?" Blake leaned forward, finding his voice. "We could start the construction company I've always dreamed about. Create something real, something lasting. Build a legacy for the girls. With my brother's money. With family money," Vanessa corrected gently. "Harold was family too, wasn't he? Don't you think he'd want that money to help his nephew and great-nieces?" The manipulation was skillful, I had to admit. She was reframing Harold's inheritance as family money that I was selfishly hoarding instead of sharing. But Harold had met Blake and Vanessa exactly once at Eleanor's funeral, and had privately told me afterward that Vanessa reminded him of a shark in shallow water. "Harold left his money to me," I said. "If he'd wanted Blake to have it, he would have included him in his will." Vanessa's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "But you don't really need $15 million, do you? What are you going to do with all that money?" There it was. The central assumption of their entire plan. I was too old, too boring, too worthless to deserve Harold's fortune. "What do you think I should do with it?" I asked. Her smile returned, predatory and confident. "Help your family, invest in the future. Think about your granddaughters, Walter. Lily wants to take violin lessons, but we can't afford them. Rose dreams of becoming a veterinarian, but college costs are so expensive now." Both lies, easily disproven by their social media posts and spending habits, but emotionally compelling nonetheless. "And what about you and Blake?" I pressed. "What would you do with the money?" They exchanged that look again, quick, loaded with meaning, perfectly synchronized. Blake found his courage. "We'd be responsible with it, Dad. Pay off our debts, buy a house with room for you to live with us, maybe take the girls to see Europe so they can learn about different cultures." The carrot and the stick again. The promise of family togetherness if I complied. The threat of continued separation if I didn't. "You want me to move in with you?" I asked. "Of course," Vanessa said quickly. "That house of yours is getting too big for you to maintain. And frankly, Walter, we worry about you living alone. What if you fell? What if there was an emergency?" Setting up the mental incompetency argument, just as they'd planned in their midnight conversation. "I'm 72, not 92, I said. "But you're not getting any younger," Blake added. and some of your decisions lately have been concerning. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. What decisions? Well, Vanessa said, her voice taking on a tone of gentle concern. Keeping all that money from Harold without telling your family. That's not like you, Walter. You've always been so generous. Maybe that's been the problem. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's eyes flashed with barely controlled anger, but she forced her voice to remain steady. Walter, please. Think about what you're saying. Think about your granddaughter's futures. Don't let pride or stubbornness prevent you from doing the right thing. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The inheritance documents sat on the counter where I'd left them. $15 million worth of temptation made manifest. The right thing, I repeated. According to whom? According to family, Blake said desperately. According to love. Love. I walked to the window overlooking my small backyard, where Eleanor's garden lay dormant under a blanket of December snow. Blake, what do you think love looks like? What do you mean? I turned to face them both. Does love look like 34 years of sacrifice? Working overtime to pay for your college while your mother clipped coupons to afford groceries? Co-signing loans I knew you'd never repay? Emptying my retirement account to help you buy a house while I continued renting a one-bedroom apartment? Blake's face flushed red. Dad, that's not fair. Or does love look like demanding my brother's inheritance while calling me selfish and senile? Vanessa was on her feet now, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. We never called you senile. Didn't you? I met her eyes directly. What were your exact words last night, Vanessa? Something about men my age being easy to manipulate? About documenting my declining mental state? The color drained from her face. Blake looked confused, then horrified as realization dawned. You heard us? He whispered. Every word. Your plans for guardianship proceedings. Your timeline for my expected death. Your excitement about assisted living facilities and private schools funded by money you'll never earn. Vanessa recovered first, her desperation making her dangerous. Walter, you're taking things out of context. We're worried about you, genuinely worried. Living alone at your age, making major financial decisions without consulting family. Stop. The word came out harder than I'd intended, echoing off the kitchen walls like a gunshot. Just stop. I walked to my desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared before dawn. Since you're so concerned about my mental state, I've scheduled comprehensive cognitive testing with Dr. Richard Patterson at Cedar Falls Medical Center. Dr. Patterson is a geriatric specialist with 30 years of experience. He'll evaluate my mental competency and provide written documentation of his findings. Blake's mouth fell open. Dad, you don't need to. Oh, but I do. Because when you file for guardianship, and we both know that's your plan, I want the court to have objective evidence of my mental state prepared by someone more qualified than a pediatrician from 2 towns over. Vanessa's face went white. How know about your college roommate, Dr. Jennifer Walsh? The same Dr. Walsh you listed as providing medical evidence of my dementia? The pediatrician who's never met me but somehow diagnosed my cognitive decline? I opened the folder and spread its contents across my kitchen table. Bank statements, loan agreements, promissory notes, and a comprehensive financial analysis of 34 years of support. Since you want to involve the legal system, let's make sure they have all the facts. $347,000 in documented financial support. $83,000 in co-signed debts you defaulted on. 47 instances of emergency loans never repaid. Blake stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Dad, those were gifts. Family helping family. I pulled out a stack of papers 6 inches thick. Blake, this is your signature on every loan agreement. Your written promises to repay. Your acknowledgement that these were loans, not gifts. But you thought I was too stupid or too senile to keep records. I met his eyes with a coldness I'd never shown my son before. You were wrong. Vanessa grabbed Blake's arm with desperate force. We don't have to listen to this. We're leaving. No, I said quietly. You're not leaving. Because if you walk out that door, I file papers this afternoon. Fraud charges for the forged medical evaluation, defamation charges for the planned incompetency petition, and debt recovery proceedings for $347,000 plus interest. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. But if you'd like to discuss this reasonably, I continued, like the competent adults you claim to be, then sit down. Both of you. They sat. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and controlled. You're going to explain to me exactly why you believe you deserve my brother's inheritance. You're going to do it honestly, without manipulation, without lies, and without threats. And then I'm going to tell you what I've decided to do with Harold's money. Blake opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. But first, you're going to apologize. To me. For the things you said last night. For the things you plan to do. For 34 years of taking my generosity for granted while calling me selfish behind my back. Vanessa's jaw tightened with barely controlled rage. Walter, you can't seriously expect. I can expect basic human decency from my family. The question is whether I'm going to get it. Blake looked between his wife and his father, seeing perhaps for the first time the impossible position his greed had created. The choice between his marriage and his conscience, between easy money and basic integrity. The next few minutes would determine whether I still had a son, or if Vanessa's poison had finally completed its work. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome, measuring out the seconds as Blake wrestled with the most important decision of his adult life. His face cycled through emotions like a kaleidoscope. Shame, fear, desperation, and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine remorse. Vanessa's grip on his arm had tightened until her knuckles went white, her crimson nails digging into his shirt fabric like talons. She whispered something in his ear, too low for me to hear, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable, her final attempt to keep him aligned with her plan. Blake shrugged away from her touch, the first act of independence I'd seen from him in years. Dad, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry. Vanessa's head snapped toward him like a viper preparing to strike. Blake, what are you doing? But Blake was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time in years. I'm apologizing to my father for being the worst son in the world. His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly he wasn't a 34-year-old man anymore. He was the 8-year-old boy who used to help me fix the lawnmower, who would sit on my shoulders at baseball games, who cried in my arms when his goldfish died. I'm sorry for last night, he continued, tears starting to flow down his cheeks. I'm sorry for the things we said about you, the things we planned. I'm sorry for 34 years of taking everything you gave me and never once saying thank you. I'm sorry for letting her convince me that you owed us something instead of the other way around. Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Blake, stop this right now. You're being manipulated by a bitter old man who what? Blake turned to face his wife, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Strength. Backbone. The man I'd hoped he'd become. Who sacrificed his entire life for me? Who worked himself half to death to pay for my education while Mom clipped coupons to buy groceries? Who emptied his retirement account so we could have granite countertops? He chose to do those things, Vanessa snapped. Nobody forced him. No, he didn't choose. I begged. I manipulated. I made him feel guilty whenever he tried to say no. Blake's voice was getting stronger, more certain. And you turned it into an art form. I watched this confrontation with a mixture of heartbreak and hope. My son was finally standing up to his wife. But it had taken 34 years and the threat of losing $15 million to make it happen. Blake, think about your daughters, Vanessa said, playing her final card. Think about Lily and Rose. Do you want them to grow up poor while their grandfather hoards millions? Poor? Blake laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vanessa, we live in a 4-bedroom house with a 3-car garage. The girls have more toys than they can play with, more clothes than they can wear. We're not poor. We're just not as rich as you want to be. Vanessa's mask finally fell away completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. Fine. You want to choose him over your own family? You want to throw away $15 million because of some misplaced guilt? Go ahead. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you've given up. She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking like gunshots against my floor. At the threshold, she turned back with venom in her green eyes. This isn't over, Walter. That money belongs to this family, and I'm going to make sure we get what we deserve. Blake might be weak enough to fall for your manipulation, but I'm not. The front door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Through the kitchen window, I watched her march to their SUV and start the engine, her movements sharp with rage. She sat there for a full minute, probably calling someone, her sister, her mother, her lawyer, to start the next phase of her campaign. Blake slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. She's going to leave me. Probably, I agreed. Is that a bad thing? He looked up at me with eyes red from crying. I love her, Dad, or I thought I did. But listening to her talk about you last night, I didn't recognize the woman I married. When did you marry her, Blake? The woman, or the idea of her? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. I think I married the fantasy. The beautiful woman who made me feel important, successful, worthy. I ignored all the warning signs because I was afraid no one else would want me. Outside, Vanessa's SUV pulled away with a screech of tires. She'd taken the girls, of course. They were her most powerful weapons against Blake's newfound independence. Dad, Blake said quietly, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've been a terrible son. But if you'll let me, I want to try to make things right. How? I'll pay back every penny I owe you. It might take years, but I'll do it. I'll get a second job, sell the house if I have to. And I want to be a real son to you, not just someone who shows up when he needs money. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, of calculation, of the same patterns that had defined our relationship for decades, but all I saw was genuine remorse and a desperate desire to rebuild what we'd lost. The debt is $412,000 with interest, I said quietly. Blake's face went pale, but he nodded. I'll pay it. At your current income, assuming you can find steady work, that would take approximately 23 years to repay. Then it takes 23 years. I stood and walked to the window looking out at Eleanor's dormant garden. She'd always believed Blake had good inside him, that Vanessa's influence was temporary, that someday he'd find the strength to be the man we'd raised him to be. Blake, I said without turning around, what would you do if I gave you $1 million right now? I'd pay off our debts and put the rest in trust funds for Lily and Rose. What about Vanessa's dreams, the European vacation, the lake house, the private schools? Vanessa's dreams have been costing us our souls, Dad. I want to give my daughters something more valuable than money. I want to give them a father they can respect. I turned to face him. And if I don't give you anything? If I keep Harold's inheritance for myself? Blake met my eyes steadily. Then that's your right. It's your money, earned by your brother, left to you. I have no claim on it beyond what you choose to give. For the first time in years, I saw my son as a man instead of a child, a flawed, damaged man who'd made terrible choices, but a man nonetheless. There's something you need to know about Harold's inheritance, I said, returning to my seat. $15 million is just the beginning. Blake's eyebrows rose. What do you mean? I pulled out another document from my folder. Harold also left me controlling interest in his investment portfolio. The $15 million is liquid assets, cash, bonds, immediately accessible funds, but the portfolio is worth another $32 million and growing. Blake's jaw dropped. $47 million. $47 million that Harold spent 40 years building. He started with nothing, Blake. Worked 18-hour days, lived in a studio apartment until he was 50, drove the same beat-up Honda for 20 years. Every dollar he made, he invested. Every investment he researched obsessively. He built that fortune through sacrifice and discipline. I never knew Uncle Harold very well, Blake said quietly, because you never asked. You met him twice, at your graduation and your mother's funeral. Both times you were too busy networking or checking your phone to have a real conversation with him. Blake flinched. I was young and stupid. You were selfish and entitled. There's a difference. I softened my tone slightly. But Harold saw potential in you anyway. He asked me about you before he died, wondered if you'd ever develop the work ethic to build something meaningful. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that you'd never had to struggle for anything, never learned the value of hard work, never developed the character that comes from overcoming real obstacles. The words hit Blake like physical blows, but he didn't argue or defend himself. He just absorbed them, nodding slowly. He left me a letter along with the inheritance documents, I continued. Instructions for how to handle the money if he died before seeing you become the man he hoped you could be. I pulled Harold's letter from the folder, the envelope yellowed with age. The handwriting was shaky. Harold had written it during his final hospital stay, when he knew his heart was failing. Walter, I read aloud, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and the money is yours to do with as you see fit. But I hope you'll consider using it to teach Blake what we learned the hard way. That wealth without character is worthless, that money without respect is meaningless, and that family love requires more than just blood relations. Blake was crying again, but quietly now, tears of genuine grief for the uncle he'd never bothered to know. Harold suggested a test, I continued. If Blake ever showed real remorse for his failures, real commitment to change and real understanding of what it means to build something, instead of just taking it, then maybe he'd be ready for a different kind of inheritance. What kind of inheritance? I set Harold's letter on the table between us. The opportunity to earn it, not to have it given to him, but to prove he deserves it. Blake leaned forward, hope and fear warring in his expression. How? Harold's business model was simple. Identify a problem, develop a solution, execute flawlessly, and reinvest the profits. He built data sync solutions by finding small companies with big problems and creating custom software to solve them. I don't know anything about software. But you know construction. You know building codes, project management, client relations. There are dozens of small construction companies in Iowa struggling with project management software, scheduling conflicts, cost overruns, problems you could solve. Blake's eyes widened as he began to understand. You want me to start a business? I want you to prove you can build something instead of just taking it. Harold left detailed notes about identifying market opportunities, developing business plans, managing cash flow, everything he learned building his company. I pulled out a thick binder filled with Harold's business wisdom. 40 years of lessons learned, mistakes made, successes earned through disciplined effort. The test is simple, I said. Build a successful business using Harold's principles. Prove you can create value instead of just consuming it. Show me you understand the difference between earning money and inheriting it. And if I succeed, if you can build a profitable business, really profitable, not just break even, and sustain it for 3 years while paying back your debts to me, then we'll talk about your inheritance. Blake stared at the binder like it contained the secrets of the universe, which, in a way, it did. What about seed capital, business loans, startup costs? You'll figure it out. Harold started DataSync with $800 and a credit card. If you're truly committed to change, you'll find a way. The front door opened, and Vanessa's voice echoed through the house. Blake, get out here now, we're leaving. Blake looked toward the door, then back at me. The moment of truth had arrived. His wife's voice or his father's challenge, his old life of dependency or the possibility of earning something real. She's going to make this hell for me, he said quietly. Probably. But Blake, you've been living in hell for years. You just called it marriage. He stood slowly, Harold's binder clutched against his chest like a life preserver. Dad, I don't know if I can do this. I've never built anything in my life. Then it's time to start. Blake walked to the door, then turned back. What if I fail? Then you fail. But you'll fail trying to build something instead of just taking it. That's more than you've ever done before. He nodded and walked toward the door, toward his wife's anger, toward the hardest choice of his life. I heard them arguing in the driveway, Vanessa's voice shrill with rage, Blake's responses too quiet to hear. Then car doors slammed and they were gone. I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of 34 years of financial documentation, and wondered if I'd just lost my son forever, or finally given him the chance to become a man. Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. 3 weeks of blessed silence had lulled me into believing the storm had passed. I spent my days reading Harold's business journals, organizing his investment portfolio, and planning the charitable foundation Eleanor and I had always dreamed of creating. For the first time in years, I felt purposeful, energized, alive. Then the doorbell shattered my peace on a gray February morning. The man at my door wore a crisp uniform and carried a clipboard thick with official-looking documents. His badge identified him as a process server for Lancaster County Court. Walter Eugene Anderson? Yes. Legal documents requiring your signature. He held out the clipboard with practiced efficiency. Sign here, please. My hand trembled slightly as I signed for what I knew would be terrible news. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with malice and legal threats. I watched his car disappear down my street before closing the door and opening my fate. The letterhead made my blood run cold. Petition for determination of mental incapacity. Below it, in bold legal text, petitioners, Vanessa Marie Anderson and Blake Robert Anderson, hereby request this honorable court to determine that respondent Walter Eugene Anderson lacks the mental capacity to manage his financial affairs and requires court-appointed guardianship. The words swam on the page as I read further. Dementia, irrational financial decisions, inability to manage daily activities, danger to himself and others through poor judgment and declining cognitive function. I sank into my kitchen chair, spreading the documents across my table with shaking hands. Vanessa had declared nuclear war, and she'd dragged Blake down with her. The court date glared at me from the first page. February 28, 2025. Less than 2 weeks away. The supporting documentation was masterfully crafted and completely fraudulent. Witness statements from neighbors I barely knew, describing erratic behavior and signs of mental decline. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson from 3 houses down claimed she'd observed me talking to myself in the yard, forgetting to bring in mail for days, and wandering confused in my bathrobe at odd hours. I'd spoken to Mrs. Henderson exactly twice in 8 years, once when her cat got stuck in my tree, and once to sign for a package. I'd never wandered anywhere in my bathrobe, and my mail was delivered to a box at the end of my driveway, not something I needed to retrieve daily. The medical evidence was even more damning and equally false. Dr. Patricia Williams, supposedly a geriatric specialist from Cedar Rapids, had provided a detailed assessment of my cognitive decline based on a consultation I'd never attended. According to her report, I showed significant signs of early-stage Alzheimer's disease, confusion about basic financial concepts, and inability to recall recent events or recognize family members. Dr. Williams didn't exist. A quick internet search revealed no licensed physician by that name in Iowa. Vanessa had fabricated an entire medical professional to support her lies. But the cruelest blow came on page 4. To prevent further financial harm to the respondent and preserve family assets for legitimate heirs, petitioners have secured a temporary restraining order freezing all accounts, investments, and property transfers pending this court's determination. They'd frozen my assets, My checking account, my savings, Harold's inheritance, all locked away based on lies and forgery. I couldn't access my own money to hire a lawyer, couldn't pay bills, couldn't even buy groceries without their permission. The legal strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. By freezing my assets first, they'd ensured I couldn't mount an effective defense. I'd be forced to rely on a court-appointed attorney who might believe their fabricated evidence, especially when presented with such comprehensive documentation of my supposed decline. My hands clenched into fists as I read the petition a second time, then a third. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were trying to strip away my independence, my dignity, my very identity as a competent human being. In their vision of my future, I'd spend my remaining years in a care facility while they spent Harold's fortune on their selfish dreams. But Vanessa had made one critical error in her otherwise perfect plan. She'd underestimated the man she was trying to destroy. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago, when I'd first sensed this war was coming. Hartwell and Associates, how may I help you? This is Walter Anderson. I need to speak with Sarah Hartwell immediately. It's an emergency. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but Ms. Hartwell is in court this morning. May I take a message? Tell her they've filed the incompetency petition. Tell her I need her in my home within the hour, or I'm going to lose everything. The urgency in my voice must have conveyed the severity of the situation. I'll reach her immediately, sir. She'll call you back within 10 minutes. Sarah called back in 7 minutes. Walter, I just got your message. Don't say another word over the phone. I'm leaving court now and will be at your house in 30 minutes. Don't sign anything, don't talk to anyone, and don't panic. We prepared for this. She was right. We had prepared for this possibility during our initial consultation 3 weeks ago. Sarah Hartwell was the most respected elder law attorney in central Iowa, with a reputation for dismantling fraudulent guardianship petitions. She'd represented Harold during his estate planning and had warned me that disgruntled family members often resorted to competency challenges when inheritance disputes arose. But knowing it was coming and living through it were entirely different experiences. As I waited for Sarah's arrival, I felt the walls of my independence closing in around me. If they succeeded with this petition, I'd become a ward of the court, my decisions subject to their approval, my freedom contingent on their goodwill. Sarah arrived in 28 minutes, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could stop bullets and wearing an expression that promised someone was about to regret their life choices. "Show me everything," she said, settling into my kitchen chair and pulling out reading glasses that made her look like an academic predator. I handed her the petition and watched her eyebrows rise as she flipped through pages. Her expression grew darker with each fraudulent document, each fabricated witness statement, each impossible medical assessment. "Walter, this isn't just a weak case, this is criminal fraud." She pulled out a magnifying glass and examined signatures. "Look at these witness statements. Different names but identical handwriting patterns. Same pen, same paper, probably all written in one sitting." She pointed to subtle details I'd missed. The loop formations in the letter G, the slant angles, the pressure patterns. These were all written by the same person. Vanessa has distinctive handwriting. Too many flourishes, too much pressure on downstrokes. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing rapidly. "And this Dr. Patricia Williams. There's no such licensed physician in Iowa. The medical board has no record of anyone by that name. The address listed is a Subway sandwich shop in Cedar Rapids." I felt a grim satisfaction as Sarah demolished their case piece by piece. "What's our next move?" "We counterattack on every front." Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began writing with military precision. "First, emergency motion to dismiss with prejudice based on fraudulent evidence. Second, motion to restore your frozen assets pending investigation. Third, criminal referral to the district attorney for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy." She looked up from her writing with steel in her eyes. "By this time tomorrow, Vanessa and Blake will be facing felony charges and potential prison time. By the end of the week, they'll be begging you to forgive them." "What about Blake?" I asked. "Is there any way to separate his case from Vanessa's?" Sarah studied the petition again. "His signature is on the documents, Walter. Legally, he's equally responsible. But She paused, examining something more closely. Interesting. Blake's signature is different from his usual pattern. See how shaky it is? How the pressure varies? This looks like someone signed under duress, possibly while intoxicated or emotionally compromised. Vanessa probably forced him to sign. That's what I'm thinking. And if we can prove coercion, Blake might qualify for a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against Vanessa. I thought about my son, the man who'd shown genuine remorse in my kitchen 3 weeks ago, who'd taken Harold's business journal and promised to build something real. Had Vanessa destroyed that progress already? Or was there still hope for redemption? Sarah, I want you to offer Blake a choice. If he cooperates fully against Vanessa, testifies to her manipulation and coercion, and provides evidence of her fraud, then we won't pursue criminal charges against him. And if he refuses, then he goes down with her, but I want to give him one last chance to choose family over greed. Sarah smiled, predatory and satisfied. I like your style, Walter. Mercy for the genuinely repentant, but no quarter for the irredeemably corrupt. She packed her materials with efficient movements. I'll file our motions by 3 p.m. today. Emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. By noon tomorrow, this case will be dismissed and Vanessa will be in handcuffs. I walked her to the door feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Sarah, what if they try something else? What if this doesn't stop them? She turned back with a smile that would have made a shark proud. Walter, they just committed multiple felonies in writing with their signatures in front of a judge. They've handed us everything we need to destroy them completely. Trust me, after tomorrow they'll never threaten you again. As Sarah's car disappeared down my street, I returned to my kitchen and made myself a cup of tea with steady hands. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned. Vanessa thought she was fighting a confused old man. Tomorrow she'd discover she'd declared war on someone with the best legal representation money could buy, and 47 million reasons to fight back. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The Lancaster County Courthouse loomed against the gray February sky like a monument to justice deferred but not denied. I sat in Sarah's Mercedes, reviewing our strategy one final time while she organized her briefcase with military precision. Remember, Walter, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. Let me do all the talking unless Judge Morrison asks you a direct question. Vanessa's attorney is going to try every emotional manipulation in the book. Your age, your isolation, your supposed confusion. Don't react. Don't defend yourself. Just let our evidence speak. I nodded, straightening my best suit, the one Eleanor had bought me for Blake's wedding 10 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing it to potentially send my son to prison. What do we know about their lawyer? Dennis Crawford, ambulance chaser who specializes in divorce cases and personal injury claims. He's completely out of his depth with elder law, which works in our favor. He probably took this case based on Vanessa's sob story and the promise of a hefty contingency fee from your inheritance. We walked through the courthouse doors, and I immediately spotted them in the hallway. Vanessa sat primly on a wooden bench dressed in a conservative navy suit that made her look like a concerned daughter-in-law rather than a predatory gold digger. Her makeup was subtle, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her jewelry minimal and tasteful. She'd costumed herself perfectly for the role of protective family member, worried about an elderly relative's declining mental state. Blake sat beside her, but his body language told a different story. His shoulders were hunched with shame, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He wouldn't meet my eyes when I passed, staring instead at the floor, like a child caught stealing cookies. "Walter," Vanessa called out, her voice pitched perfectly to suggest loving concern. "We're so worried about you. When was the last time you had a proper medical checkup?" The performance was masterful, designed to be overheard by potential jurors and court personnel. But I followed Sarah's advice and ignored her completely, walking past without acknowledgement. "You see?" Vanessa said to her lawyer, her voice just loud enough to carry. "He's becoming more antisocial, more isolated. Classic signs of cognitive decline." Dennis Crawford was exactly what I'd expected. A rumpled man in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he'd learned law from television shows. He whispered urgently with Vanessa, probably realizing for the first time that this case was far more complex than she'd led him to believe. We entered courtroom 3 and took our seats at the respondents' table. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, a stern woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every scam and manipulation the legal system had to offer. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The matter of Peterson Anderson versus Walter Anderson, petition for determination of mental incapacity." Crawford stood first, his opening statement a masterpiece of emotional manipulation disguised as legal argument. He painted a picture of a lonely old man, isolated and confused, making irrational financial decisions that threatened his own welfare and his family's security. "Your Honor," Crawford said, his voice trembling with practiced sincerity, "the petitioners come before this court not seeking personal gain, but protection for a beloved family member who can no longer protect himself. Mr. Anderson's recent behavior, hoarding a $15 million inheritance while his family struggles financially, refusing medical care, displaying increasing antisocial tendencies, all point to a man who desperately needs our help." He presented their fabricated evidence with theatrical flair, reading from fake witness statements and medical reports as if they were gospel truth. Mrs. Henderson's observations of my supposedly erratic behavior, Dr. Williams's detailed assessment of my cognitive decline, financial records showing my irrational refusal to support my struggling family. We ask this court to appoint guardians who will ensure Mr. Anderson receives proper medical care, and that his assets are managed responsibly for his own benefit and that of his legitimate heirs. Judge Morrison listened impassively, occasionally making notes but revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Crawford finished, she turned to our table. "Ms. Hartwell, your response?" Sarah stood with the fluid grace of a predator preparing to strike. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a confused elderly man in need of protection, but rather an elaborate fraud perpetrated by family members seeking to steal his inheritance through perjury and forgery." The courtroom tensed like a drawn bowstring. Crawford started to object, but Sarah continued without pause. "The petitioners have submitted fabricated witness statements, forged medical evaluations, and false claims about Mr. Anderson's mental state. We will demonstrate that this entire petition is a criminal conspiracy designed to strip a competent man of his rights and his fortune." Sarah approached the bench with a thick folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that completely destroys the petitioner's case and exposes their fraud." She handed Judge Morrison a document. "First, a comprehensive cognitive evaluation performed yesterday by Dr. Richard Patterson, certified geriatric specialist at Iowa Medical Center. Dr. Patterson's assessment shows that Mr. Anderson's cognitive function is not only normal for his age, but exceptional. His scores place him in the 95th percentile for memory, reasoning, and problem-solving abilities." I watched Crawford's face pale as he realized the scope of what they'd walked into. "Second," Sarah continued, "a report from the Iowa State Medical Board confirming that no physician named Patricia Williams is licensed to practice medicine in this state. The address listed on her supposed medical evaluation is a Subway restaurant in Cedar Rapids." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose sharply. "Ms. Hartwell, are you alleging that this medical report is completely fabricated?" "That's exactly what I'm alleging, Your Honor, and I can prove it." Sarah pulled out a handwriting analysis report. Expert analysis shows that all the witness statements were written by the same person despite bearing different signatures. The handwriting patterns, pen pressure, and letter formations are identical across all documents. Crawford was on his feet now, panic evident in his voice. "Your Honor, these are serious accusations being made without—" "Sit down, Mr. Crawford." Judge Morrison's voice could have cut glass. "Ms. Hartwell, continue." "Third, Your Honor, we have audio recordings of the petitioners discussing their plan to fabricate evidence and steal Mr. Anderson's inheritance." Sarah played a snippet of the conversation I'd recorded through my bedroom ceiling. Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. Men his age can be influenced, especially when they're lonely. And if gentle persuasion doesn't work, we have legal options. We could contest his mental state, claim undue influence. The courtroom erupted. Crawford was objecting frantically. Vanessa was whispering urgently in Blake's ear, and Judge Morrison was gaveling for order with the force of Thor's hammer. "Silence!" Judge Morrison's voice boomed through the courtroom. When quiet returned, her eyes were blazing with judicial fury. "Mr. Crawford, approach the bench now." The whispered conference lasted 3 minutes, during which Crawford's face went from pale to green to ashen gray. When he returned to his table, he looked like a man walking to his own execution. "Your Honor," Crawford said, his voice barely audible. "In light of new evidence, the petitioners would like to withdraw their petition." "Oh no, Mr. Crawford. We're well past withdrawal." Judge Morrison's voice was ice-cold with professional outrage. "This court has heard evidence of fraud, perjury, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Bailiff, please escort the petitioners into custody pending criminal charges." The next few minutes passed in a blur of chaos and justice. Vanessa was handcuffed first, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking as she screamed obscenities about unfair persecution and family betrayal. Blake submitted to arrest without resistance, his face a study in defeat and shame. As they were led away, Vanessa turned back with venom in her eyes. "This isn't over, Walter. You can't keep what belongs to family." "Mrs. Anderson," Judge Morrison said sharply, "you're facing felony charges for fraud and elder abuse. I suggest you focus on finding a competent attorney instead of making threats in my courtroom." The courtroom cleared quickly, leaving Sarah and me alone with the weight of what had just transpired. My son was going to prison because of his wife's greed and his own weakness. It should have felt like victory, but it felt like loss. "Walter," Sarah said gently, "I know this is hard, but you did the right thing. Sometimes justice requires difficult choices." I nodded, but my heart felt heavy. "What happens now?" "They'll be arraigned on criminal charges within 48 hours. Vanessa is looking at 3 to 5 years for fraud and elder abuse. Blake might get a lighter sentence if he cooperates and testifies against her. And my assets? Unfrozen immediately. Full control restored. The court has also issued a restraining order preventing them from contacting you or coming near your property." We walked out of the courthouse together, the February sun seeming brighter than it had in weeks. Justice had been served, but at a cost that would haunt me for years to come. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and Harold's business journals, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the county jail. "Dad?" Blake's voice was broken, desperate. "Dad, please, I need to talk to you." I stared at the phone for a long moment, remembering the little boy who used to help me fix the lawnmower and the man who'd chosen greed over family. "Talk," I said finally. "I'm sorry. God, Dad, I'm so sorry. Vanessa made me sign those papers. She said if I didn't support her, she'd take the girls and I'd never see them again. I was weak, and I was scared, and I made the worst mistake of my life." "You've been making that mistake for 10 years, Blake. Why should this time be different?" "Because I've lost everything that mattered except you. My marriage is over. My reputation is destroyed. My daughters think I'm a criminal. All I have left is the chance to be the son you deserved all along." I closed my eyes, thinking of Eleanor's final words about taking care of Blake, but not forgetting to live for myself. "Blake, Sarah tells me you might be offered a plea agreement if you testify against Vanessa. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. How she planned it all, how she forged the documents, how she threatened to leave me if I didn't cooperate. I'll burn my own marriage down to protect you." "Why?" "Because you're my father, and I've been a terrible son for 34 years. Because you deserved better than what I gave you. Because maybe, if I finally do the right thing, I can start to earn back even a small piece of your respect." I looked at Harold's journals on my table, thinking about second chances and the possibility of redemption. Blake, there's something I want you to consider while you're sitting in that cell. Harold's business principles, the ones in the journal I gave you, they apply to more than just building companies. They apply to building character, building relationships, building a life worth living. I still have the journal, Dad. I've been reading it every night, trying to understand what Uncle Harold was really trying to teach me. And what have you learned? That everything worthwhile has to be earned. That integrity isn't negotiable. That the only real security comes from being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not feel ashamed. Maybe there was hope after all. Blake, when you get out of jail, come see me. We'll talk about Harold's challenge again, about the possibility of earning something instead of taking it. You'd give me another chance after everything I've done? One more chance. But this is it, son. There won't be another. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Blake's voice, strong for the first time in years. I won't need another one, Dad. I promise you that. I hung up and returned to Harold's journals, reading about building something from nothing, about the satisfaction of earned success, about the difference between temporary wealth and lasting legacy. Outside my window, spring was coming to Iowa. The snow was melting, the trees were budding, and somewhere in the county jail, my son was finally learning the lessons I should have taught him 30 years ago. 3 weeks later, I sat in Sarah Hartwell's office reviewing the plea agreement that would determine my son's fate. The document was thorough, unforgiving, and absolutely necessary. Blake would plead guilty to conspiracy and fraud, testify fully against Vanessa, and serve 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. It's a good deal, Walter, Sarah said, removing her reading glasses. Given the severity of the charges, Blake could have faced 5 to 7 years. The prosecutor is being lenient because of his cooperation and his obvious remorse. I studied the fine print, my engineer's mind processing every clause and condition. What about restitution? All legal fees, court costs, and damages will be Blake's responsibility. The prosecution estimates around $47,000, plus, of course, the outstanding debt he owes you. Nearly $500,000 total. At Blake's current income, when he could find work, it would take him the rest of his natural life to repay. And Vanessa? Sarah's smile was coldly satisfied. No plea offer. She's going to trial on all charges: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, perjury. Her new attorney is talking tough about fighting it, but with Blake's testimony and the evidence we've compiled, she's looking at 7 to 10 years in state prison. The conference room door opened, and Blake entered with his court-appointed attorney. Prison had changed him in ways that went beyond the orange jumpsuit and regulation haircut. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes clearer, his entire demeanor more focused and determined than I'd seen in years. Dad, he said quietly, taking the seat across from me. Thank you for coming. Blake. I nodded acknowledgement but kept my expression neutral. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. His attorney, a young public defender named Jennifer Walsh, spread the plea documents across the conference table. Mr. Anderson, your son has reviewed all terms of this agreement. He understands the consequences and is prepared to accept full responsibility for his actions. Blake leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Dad, before I sign this, I need you to know something. These 3 weeks in jail have been the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. How so? Worst because I finally understand what I've lost. Your respect, my daughter's trust, any claim to being a decent human being. But best because for the first time in my adult life, I've had to face consequences without someone rescuing me. He gestured around the sterile conference room. No money from you to make problems disappear. No manipulation from Vanessa to blame someone else. Just me, my choices, and the reality of what those choices cost. I waited for him to continue, curious where this was leading. I've been reading Uncle Harold's journal every night, Blake said. Really reading it, not just skimming for business tips. And I finally understand what he was trying to teach through his example. Which is? That wealth without character is worthless. That respect has to be earned, not inherited. That the only security that matters is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not feel ashamed. Blake's voice grew stronger, more certain. Dad, I want to sign this plea agreement. I want to serve my sentence. I want to pay every penny I owe you, not because a court ordered it, but because it's right. Jennifer Walsh looked surprised. Blake, you don't have to make this harder on yourself. The prosecution is offering justice, Blake interrupted, and justice is exactly what I need. He picked up the pen and signed the plea agreement with steady hands, each signature a acceptance of responsibility he'd avoided for 34 years. Blake, I said quietly, what will you do when you get out? Build something real, something valuable, something I can be proud of. His eyes met mine directly. Uncle Harold's challenge, to prove I can create value instead of just consuming it. I want to earn the right to call myself your son again. And your daughters? Blake's composure cracked slightly. Lily and Rose are living with Vanessa's sister in Minneapolis while all this gets sorted out. They think their daddy is a bad man who hurt their grandfather. And they're right. But they won't always be 8 years old, I said gently. Someday they'll be old enough to understand complicated situations, to forgive complicated people who've made genuine efforts to change. Hope flickered in Blake's eyes. You think so? I think children who grow up seeing their father take responsibility for his mistakes, work hard to make amends and build something meaningful with his life, will be proud of him eventually, but only if the change is real. Blake nodded, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. Dad, there's something else I need to tell you. Something about Vanessa that came out during the investigation. Sarah leaned forward with interest. What kind of something? She's been planning this for over 2 years. The fraud, the guardianship petition, all of it. She has a whole folder at home filled with research about elder abuse cases, legal precedents, strategies for proving mental incompetency. My blood ran cold. 2 years? Since right after Uncle Harold's diagnosis. She knew he was dying, knew he'd probably leave you money, and started planning how to take it before he was even gone. The premeditation was chilling. While I'd been grieving my brother's impending death and trying to honor his memory, Vanessa had been plotting to steal his legacy. There's more, Blake continued. She's done this before. Her first marriage ended when her husband's grandfather left him a large inheritance. She convinced him to invest it all in a business scheme that failed, then divorced him and took half of what was left. Sarah was taking notes rapidly. This is excellent information for the prosecution. A pattern of targeting family members with inheritances makes this look like a criminal enterprise rather than an isolated incident. Blake, I said carefully, why are you telling us this? It could hurt your plea agreement if it looks like you're trying to shift blame to Vanessa. Because it's the truth, and because I need you to understand that while I was weak and greedy and stupid, I wasn't the mastermind here. Vanessa saw Uncle Harold's money as her retirement plan from the moment she learned he was sick. The revelation recontextualized everything, the increasing pressure for financial support, the subtle manipulation, the growing resentment when I didn't give them what they wanted. I hadn't been dealing with spontaneous greed. I'd been dealing with a calculated long-term plan to steal my inheritance. Dad, Blake said quietly, I know this doesn't excuse what I did. I still signed those papers, still went along with her plan, still betrayed you in the worst possible way. But I need you to know that the moment I chose her over you, I knew I was making the wrong choice. I just wasn't strong enough to do the right thing. And now? Now I don't have a choice but to be strong. My daughters deserve a father they can respect, even if it takes years to become that man. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Blake would appear before Judge Morrison, formally accept responsibility for his crimes, and begin serving his sentence immediately. It would be months before he was released, years before he finished probation, decades before he paid off his debts. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Blake turned to me one final time. Dad, I know I have no right to ask for anything else, but I have one request. What? Don't give up on me. I know I've given you every reason to write me off completely, but I'm asking you to wait and see if I can become the man Uncle Harold thought I might be someday. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the entitled boy who'd spent my money without gratitude. Not the weak man who'd chosen his wife's manipulation over his father's love, but a human being who'd finally understood the cost of his choices and was willing to pay it. Blake, I said finally, I waited 34 years for you to grow up. I suppose I can wait a little longer to see if you actually have. 6 months later, I sat in the same courthouse where Blake had pled guilty, but this time as a witness in the criminal trial of Vanessa Marie Anderson. The woman who had once sat at my Christmas table demanding my inheritance now faced the possibility of spending the next decade in state prison. The prosecution had built an airtight case with Blake's testimony as their cornerstone. My son had spent 4 months in minimum security prison, and the experience had transformed him in ways that went far beyond the obvious. When he took the witness stand, he carried himself with a dignity I'd never seen before, the bearing of a man who'd faced his worst impulses and chosen to be better. Mr. Anderson, the prosecutor asked, please tell the court how your wife first approached you about your father's inheritance. Blake's voice was steady, clear, unashamed of the truth he was telling. 3 days after Christmas, Vanessa told me that we deserved the money more than my father did. She said he was too old to appreciate it, that he'd probably die within 10 years anyway, and that we should find a way to claim it before he wasted it. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. In the defendant's chair, Vanessa sat perfectly composed, her new attorney, a high-priced criminal defense lawyer named Marcus Sullivan, whispering occasionally in her ear. What was your response to this suggestion? The prosecutor continued. I was uncomfortable with the idea, but Vanessa was persistent. She said family money should stay in the family, that my father had always been selfish with his finances, and that we owed it to our daughters to secure their futures. When did the plan become more specific? Blake's jaw tightened with remembered shame. About 2 weeks later, when it became clear that my father wasn't going to voluntarily share the inheritance. Vanessa started researching legal options for forcing him to give us the money. The prosecutor handed Blake a thick folder. Is this the research your wife compiled? Blake opened it and nodded. Yes. Articles about guardianship proceedings, examples of successful mental incompetency cases, template documents for petitioning the court. She'd been planning this for months. From my seat in the gallery, I watched Vanessa's face carefully. Her expression never changed, but I saw her hands clench slightly when Blake mentioned the research folder. Even now, facing prison time, she showed no remorse for her actions. Mr. Anderson, did your wife discuss with you the fabrication of evidence to support the incompetency petition? Yes. She said we needed to create a compelling narrative about my father's declining mental state. She wrote all the witness statements herself, using different pens and slightly different handwriting to make them look authentic. And the medical evaluation from Dr. Patricia Williams? Vanessa created that too. She found a template online and filled it out with symptoms she'd researched for early-stage dementia. The doctor doesn't exist. She made up the name. Vanessa's attorney objected frequently, trying to discredit Blake's testimony as the vindictive lies of a bitter ex-husband. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution had handwriting analysis, audio recordings, digital forensics showing when documents were created, and a paper trail of Vanessa's research that stretched back 2 years. When Blake stepped down from the witness stand, he caught my eye briefly. There was no plea for forgiveness in his expression, no desperate attempt to win my approval. Just a man who'd told the truth and was prepared to live with the consequences. The defense case was pathetic. Sullivan tried to paint Vanessa as a concerned daughter-in-law worried about an elderly man's declining faculties, but the evidence made that narrative impossible to sustain. Her own research files proved premeditation. Blake's testimony established her as the driving force behind the fraud. The fabricated medical evidence demonstrated criminal intent. Vanessa never took the stand in her own defense, probably because Sullivan knew she'd be destroyed on cross-examination. Instead, they relied on character witnesses who testified to her qualities as a mother and community member, completely ignoring the criminal mastermind who'd planned to steal my inheritance. The closing arguments were foregone conclusions. The prosecution methodically laid out the evidence, painting a picture of calculated elder abuse perpetrated by a woman who viewed her father-in-law as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth she'd never earned. The defense made desperate appeals to emotion, asking the jury to consider Vanessa's young daughters and the hardship her imprisonment would cause. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. Count 1, conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. Count 2, elder abuse, guilty. Count 3, perjury, guilty. Count 4, forgery, guilty. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. She slumped in her chair as if the words were physical blows. Her carefully maintained mask of innocence finally shattered. Behind her, her sister and mother sat in stunned silence, perhaps finally understanding the extent of her crimes. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the outcome was already clear. With her criminal history and the premeditated nature of her crimes, Vanessa would serve close to the maximum sentence. As the courtroom cleared, I approached Blake in the hallway. He looked exhausted but relieved, like a man who'd carried a heavy burden for months and finally been allowed to set it down. "Thank you," I said simply. "For what?" "For telling the truth, for choosing what was right over what was easy." Blake shook his head. "Dad, I should have told the truth from the beginning. I should have stood up to her when she first suggested stealing from you. I should have been the man you raised me to be instead of the weak fool I became. But you did tell the truth eventually. That matters." "Does it? Vanessa's going to prison, our daughters are traumatized, and I still owe you nearly $500,000. How does any of this matter?" I thought about Harold's journals, about the long road to building something meaningful from nothing, about the possibility of redemption through genuine effort. "Blake, when you get out of prison next month, come see me. We'll talk about Uncle Harold's challenge again, about building something real instead of just tearing things down. You'd still give me that chance? After everything? One chance. One opportunity to prove you can create value instead of just consuming it. But this time, you'll be starting from the bottom, with nothing but your own effort to rely on." Blake nodded slowly. "I wouldn't want it any other way." 3 weeks later, Vanessa was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with possibility of parole after serving 6. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over, Walter," she hissed. "You may have won this battle, but I'll never stop fighting for what my daughters deserve." Even facing nearly a decade in prison, she still believed she was the victim, still thought she deserved money she'd never earned, still refused to accept responsibility for her choices. Judge Morrison leaned forward with steel in her voice. "Mrs. Anderson, you'll have plenty of time to reflect on your choices during your incarceration. I suggest you use it to develop some understanding of the difference between what you want and what you deserve." As Vanessa disappeared through the courthouse doors for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of justice served and the possibility of genuine redemption ahead. Blake was released from prison 2 days later, carrying nothing but Harold's business journal and a determination to finally become the man his uncle had hoped he could be. Blake stood on my front porch on a crisp October morning, carrying a worn duffel bag and looking like a man who'd been to hell and back. Prison had stripped away the last vestiges of entitlement from his bearing, leaving behind someone harder, more focused, more genuinely humble than I'd ever seen him. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm ready to start over." I invited him in for coffee, noting how he'd changed during our months apart. His handshake was firmer, his eye contact direct and sustained, his posture straight without the defensive hunch that had characterized him for years. Prison had been a harsh teacher, but an effective one. "Tell me about your plans," I said, settling into my kitchen chair with 2 steaming mugs between us. Blake pulled out Harold's business journal, now held together with rubber bands and filled with his own handwritten notes in the margins. "I've been studying Uncle Harold's principles for 8 months now, not just reading them, but really understanding what they mean." He opened to a page filled with his careful annotations. Harold's first rule: identify a real problem that real people will pay real money to solve. I think I've found one. Go on. Construction project management software. Every small contractor I worked with over the years struggled with the same issues: scheduling conflicts, cost overruns, communication problems with clients, inventory management disasters. Blake's voice grew more animated as he explained his research. The big companies have expensive enterprise solutions that cost $50,000 a year. The small guys use spreadsheets and sticky notes. There's nothing designed specifically for contractors with 3 to 20 employees. I leaned back in my chair, impressed despite myself. "You've identified a market niche." "Exactly. And Harold's second rule: start with what you know, not what you wish you knew. I know construction, I know the problems, I just need to learn enough programming to build a solution." "Programming isn't easy to learn." Blake smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "Dad, I spent 8 months in prison with nothing to do but read and think. I taught myself Python programming using books from the library, built my first prototype on a prison computer during my 3 hours of allowed internet time per week." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a rough but functional application. "It's basic, but it works. Project scheduling, cost tracking, client communication, inventory management. Everything a small contractor needs in one simple package." I examined the interface, noting its clean design and intuitive navigation. "This is impressive work, Blake." "It's a start. Harold's third rule: perfect is the enemy of good enough. Get a working product to market, then improve it based on customer feedback." We spent the next hour going through his business plan, a detailed document that showed months of careful research and planning. Market analysis, competitive landscape, pricing strategy, development timeline, financial projections. It was the most thorough piece of work I'd ever seen from my son. "Blake," I said finally, "this looks viable. But starting a software company requires capital. Development costs, marketing expenses, legal fees. Where are you planning to get funding?" "That's where Harold's fourth rule comes in. Bootstrap everything. Start small, grow organically, reinvest profits instead of taking on debt." He showed me his financial calculations. "I need about $12,000 to get started. Web hosting, software licenses, legal incorporation, basic marketing. I can handle the programming myself, work from home, keep overhead minimal." $12,000 is a lot of money for someone just out of prison. "I know. That's why I'm not asking you for it." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not?" "Dad, you've given me enough money over the years to fund 10 startups. This time I'm going to earn my seed capital the same way Uncle Harold did, by working for it." Blake explained his plan with the methodical precision of an engineer, a trait he'd apparently inherited from me along with his eye color. "I've got a job lined up with Henderson Construction starting Monday. 40 hours a week at $18 an hour. I'll live here with you, if you'll let me, and put every penny toward my business fund." "You want to live here?" "Only if you're comfortable with it. I'll pay rent, buy groceries, help with maintenance. I want to contribute, not just take." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. But all I saw was determined sincerity and the hard-won wisdom that comes from losing everything and choosing to rebuild from scratch. "Blake, if you live here, there will be rules." "Name them." "No drinking, no gambling, no contact with Vanessa or anyone connected to her schemes. You work your job, develop your business, and prove you've actually changed instead of just talking about it." "Agreed." "And you pay me back $500 a month toward your debt, even while you're saving for your startup." Blake's face went pale. "Dad, that's going to make saving almost impossible." "I know Harold's fifth rule. Nothing worthwhile comes easy. If you want to build something real, you have to sacrifice for it. Blake was quiet for a long moment, calculating in his head. At his projected income, paying me and saving for his business would leave him with almost nothing for personal expenses. He'd be living like a monk, working like a slave, sacrificing everything for the chance to build something meaningful. Okay, he said finally. $500 a month plus business savings. It'll take me almost 2 years to save enough for the startup, but I'll do it. Why? Because Uncle Harold was right. The things that matter most are the things you earn through genuine effort. I want to earn the right to call myself an entrepreneur instead of just a dreamer. I extended my hand across the kitchen table. Welcome home, son. Blake's grip was firm, his eyes clear, his commitment absolute. For the first time in 34 years, I believed my son might actually become the man Eleanor and I had raised him to be. 2 years and 3 months later, I sat in my study watching Blake put the finishing touches on the most important presentation of his life. His laptop screen showed Construct Flow Pro, the project management software he'd built from nothing with his own hands, his own money, and an work ethic I'd never seen from him before. The transformation had been gradual, but undeniable. Blake worked his construction job 40 hours a week, programmed another 30 hours on weekends and evenings, and somehow still found time to help maintain my house and yard. He'd kept every promise he'd made, paying me $500 a month religiously, saving every other penny for his business, living like a monk while building his dream from scratch. Dad, he said, closing the laptop with nervous energy, tomorrow's the big day. Henderson Construction has agreed to be my first beta customer. If they like the software, they'll pay me $5,000 for a year-long license. And if they don't like it, Blake smiled grimly. Then I go back to the drawing board and try again. Harold's 6th rule: failure is education, not defeat. The man speaking to me bore little resemblance to the entitled child who demanded my inheritance 3 years ago. Prison had stripped away his illusions. Honest work had built his character, and the slow process of earning something real had given him genuine confidence instead of artificial bravado. Blake, I said carefully, there's something I need to tell you about Uncle Harold's challenge. He looked up with interest. What about it? I pulled out a letter from my desk drawer, one I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Harold left specific instructions about what to do if you actually succeeded in building a viable business. Blake's eyes widened as I unfolded the letter, dated just weeks before Harold's death. Walter, I read aloud, if Blake has managed to build a profitable business using genuine effort instead of shortcuts, then he's ready for the next phase of his education. The attached investment fund contains $2 million, earmarked specifically for young entrepreneurs who've proven they can create value instead of just consuming it. Blake's face went white. $2 million? Not a gift, I continued reading. An investment. Harold established specific terms. Blake can access the fund if he matches it dollar for dollar with his own earned capital, demonstrates sustainable profitability for at least 1 year, and commits to mentoring other young entrepreneurs who are trying to build legitimate businesses. I set the letter on the desk between us. In other words, Harold believed that if you could prove you'd actually changed, you'd be ready for the responsibility of helping others change too. Blake stared at the letter as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He planned this whole thing. Harold understood something about human nature that I was too soft to accept. That people don't value what they don't earn. That respect has to be built through actions not inherited through blood relations. Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Dad, even if Henderson loves the software, even if I get other customers, it could take years to earn $1 million to match Harold's investment. Probably. Are you prepared for that? Yes. His answer came without hesitation. Actually, I'm grateful for it. 3 years ago, I would have taken Harold's money and probably blown it on the first shiny opportunity that came along. Now I understand that earning it is more valuable than having it. The next morning, Blake left for his presentation at Henderson Construction, with 36 months of work condensed into a single laptop demonstration. I spent the day in my garden, Eleanor's garden, which I'd finally learned to tend properly, thinking about second chances, earned redemption, and the long road from entitlement to genuine accomplishment. Blake returned at 6 p.m. with news that would change both our lives. "They loved it," he announced, his voice trembling with excitement and disbelief. "Not just Henderson. They called 3 other contractors during the demo. I have 5 customers ready to sign annual licenses, $25,000 in committed revenue for the first year." I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with watching my son finally become the man he was capable of being. "But more than that," Blake continued, "Henderson wants to partner with me to develop custom features for large projects. They're talking about a long-term development contract worth potentially hundreds of thousands." "And how do you feel about that?" Blake sat down in Eleanor's old chair, his expression thoughtful. Terrified, grateful, proud, humbled, all at once. He looked at me directly. "Dad, I want you to know that whether I ever qualify for Uncle Harold's investment fund or not, these past 3 years have been the best of my life." "Why?" "Because for the first time ever, I've earned something real. This business isn't successful because you funded it or because I manipulated someone into giving it to me. It's successful because I identified a real problem and built a real solution through my own effort." Blake pulled out a check and handed it to me. His monthly payment, exactly $500, right on schedule as it had been for 36 months. "Dad, I've been doing some calculations. At this rate, I'll have your debt paid off in about 47 more years." I laughed, the first truly joyful laugh I'd had in years. "That might be optimistic given my age." "Actually," Blake said with a grin, "I was hoping we could renegotiate the terms." "Oh? Now that Construct Flow is generating real revenue, I'd like to increase my payments to $1,500 a month, and I want to pay interest at market rates, not the 0% you've been charging me." I stared at my son, hardly believing what I was hearing. "Blake, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Harold's 7th rule. Honor your debts completely, not just conveniently. I want to pay you back in full, with proper interest, as quickly as possible." "Why?" "Because I want my daughters to see their father as a man who keeps his word completely, not just partially. When Lily and Rose are old enough to understand what happened during those dark years, I want them to also understand how I made it right." Blake's daughters were now 11 years old, living with Vanessa's sister while their mother served her prison sentence. Blake had been sending support payments religiously and writing letters they weren't yet ready to read, building a foundation for the relationship he hoped to rebuild when they were mature enough to understand complicated forgiveness. "Blake," I said quietly, "your uncle would be proud of you." "I hope so. I hope Mom would be proud too." I thought of Eleanor, who'd always believed Blake had good inside him, who'd asked me to take care of him but not forget to live for myself. She'd have been amazed by the man he'd become, and proud of the father who'd finally learned when to help and when to step back. "Son," I said, "there's one more thing Uncle Harold left for you." I pulled out another letter, this one sealed and marked, "For Blake, when he's ready." Blake opened it with trembling hands and read silently for several minutes, his eyes filling with tears. "What does it say?" I asked gently. "That he's sorry he never got to know me better when he was alive. That he hopes his challenge helped me find the strength I always had inside me. And that building something meaningful is the greatest gift we can give to the people who love us." Blake folded the letter carefully and put it in his wallet. "Dad, I promise you something. Whether I qualify for Harold's investment fund next year or in 10 years or never, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that his faith in me wasn't misplaced." "And how will you do that?" "By building something bigger than just a software company. By creating opportunities for other people who are trying to change their lives. By being the kind of father my daughters deserve and the kind of son you deserved all along." I looked at Blake, really looked at him, and saw not the entitled boy who'd spent my money without gratitude, not the weak man who'd chosen his wife's manipulation over his father's love, but a human being who'd traveled the long road from entitlement to earned respect. "You already are that son," I said. "You became him the day you chose to rebuild instead of just taking." Outside my window, spring was coming to Iowa again. The snow was melting, the trees were budding, and in my kitchen sat a man I was finally proud to call my son. 5 years after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I stood in the conference room of the Harold Anderson Center for Entrepreneurial Development, watching Blake address a room full of young business owners who reminded me of himself before his transformation. The center occupied the renovated third floor of a downtown Cedar Falls office building, funded by Harold's investment program and managed by Blake's expanding software company. "The first rule of building something real," Blake told the assembled entrepreneurs, "is understanding that nobody owes you success. Not your family, not society, not the universe. Success is something you earn through consistent effort, intelligent planning, and the willingness to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term achievement." The audience listened with the intensity of people who'd already learned some hard lessons about entitlement and easy money. Blake had carefully selected these participants, former addicts rebuilding their lives, ex-convicts seeking legitimate opportunities, young people from difficult backgrounds who understood that genuine change required genuine effort. "My Uncle Harold started his first business with $800 and a credit card," Blake continued. "My father spent 40 years working 60-hour weeks to build a secure retirement. I spent 34 years taking their generosity for granted and nearly destroyed my family through greed and selfishness." Blake's transformation had been remarkable to witness. His software company now employed 12 people and served over 300 small construction firms across the Midwest. More importantly, he'd become a mentor to others seeking redemption through entrepreneurship, sharing Harold's principles with people who needed second chances as desperately as he had. "The hardest part of changing your life," he said, "isn't learning new skills or developing business plans. It's accepting that you were wrong about fundamental things, about what you deserved, about what others owed you, about the difference between taking and earning." After the presentation, Blake approached me with his quarterly report, a thick document detailing both his business performance and his progress toward Harold's matching investment challenge. "ConstructFlow Pro had its best quarter ever," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Revenues up 43%, profit margins holding steady at 18%. But more importantly, we've helped our customers save over $2 million in project costs this year." I reviewed the financial statements with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to engineering blueprints. Blake's business was thriving not through manipulation or shortcuts, but through the disciplined application of Harold's principles. Solve real problems, deliver genuine value, reinvest profits wisely, build relationships based on trust rather than exploitation. And the mentorship program? 15 graduates so far, with 12 still operating profitable businesses after 2 years. Sarah Martinez just landed a major contract for her catering company, and James Wilson's automotive repair shop is expanding to a second location. Blake had exceeded Harold's requirements for accessing the investment fund, but had chosen to wait until he could make an even greater impact. His caution and patience demonstrated wisdom I'd never seen from him during his entitled years. "Blake," I said, closing the financial report, "I think it's time we talked about the next phase of your uncle's plan." His eyebrows rose with interest. "There's more?" I pulled out a final envelope from Harold's estate, one I'd been instructed to open only when Blake had proven himself completely. The letter inside was brief but transformative. "Walter, if Blake has reached this point, he's ready for the full truth. The $2 million investment fund was just the beginning. Harold's complete estate plan includes a $45 million foundation dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs who've overcome significant personal challenges to build legitimate businesses." Blake's face went pale as I continued reading. "The foundation requires a director who understands both failure and redemption, someone who's traveled the path from entitlement to earned respect. If Blake is willing to dedicate his life to helping others make the same journey, the foundation is his to lead. $45 million? Blake's voice was barely a whisper. Not to spend on yourself, I clarified. To invest in others who are trying to rebuild their lives through legitimate business development. Harold envisioned something like a combination of business incubator, mentorship program, and second chance academy. Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing the enormity of what Harold had entrusted to him. Dad, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. Harold thought you would be, once you'd proven you could build something meaningful from nothing. But the choice is yours, Blake. You can continue growing your software company, or you can dedicate your life to helping others find the redemption you found. Blake stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Cedar Falls, where his modest office building sat among dozens of small businesses, the kind of enterprises Harold's foundation could help flourish. What would you do? He asked. I'd remember what your mother said before she died, that taking care of family means helping them become their best selves, not enabling their worst impulses. Blake turned back to me with determination in his eyes. Then I know my answer. I accept the responsibility, but with conditions. What conditions? First, you serve as chairman of the foundation board. Your judgment and Harold's principles need to guide everything we do. Second, we start small and grow organically, just like Harold taught me. No grand gestures or publicity campaigns, just steady, sustainable help for people who are genuinely committed to change. I felt a surge of pride watching my son consider not what this opportunity could do for him, but what he could do with it for others. Third, Blake continued, every recipient of foundation assistance has to demonstrate the same progression I did: genuine remorse for past failures, commitment to earning rather than taking, and willingness to mentor others once they've achieved success. And fourth, Blake smiled, the confident smile of a man who'd earned his place in the world. Fourth, we name it the Eleanor and Harold Anderson Foundation for Second Chances. Mom believed in redemption through love. Uncle Harold believed in redemption through effort. Together, they represent everything I want this foundation to accomplish. 3 months later, the foundation was officially established with Blake as executive director and me as board chairman. Our first initiative was modest but meaningful, a 12-week program for ex-offenders seeking to start legitimate businesses, combining Harold's practical principles with the kind of supportive accountability that had transformed Blake's life. The program's first graduate was Maria Santos, a former drug addict who'd built a successful house cleaning service while serving probation. Her business employed 6 other women in recovery and had expanded to serve 3 counties. Mr. Anderson, she told Blake during the graduation ceremony, 5 years ago I was homeless and hopeless. Today I own a business, employ other people, and my children are proud to call me their mother. Your foundation didn't just give me money, it gave me the tools to rebuild my life from the ground up. Blake's response captured everything Harold had hoped to achieve through his unconventional inheritance plan. Maria, the foundation didn't rebuild your life. You did that through your own effort and commitment. We just provided the guidance and support you needed to trust yourself again. 7 years after the Christmas that shattered our family, Blake received the phone call he'd been hoping for since the day Vanessa was sentenced to prison. His daughters, now 18 years old and high school graduates, wanted to meet with their father to hear his side of the story they'd grown up believing. Lily and Rose had thrived despite their traumatic childhood, raised by Vanessa's sister Jennifer in Minneapolis while their mother served her sentence and their father rebuilt his life from nothing. They'd grown into thoughtful, independent young women who'd earned full scholarships to the University of Minnesota, achievements that had nothing to do with inherited wealth and everything to do with personal effort. Blake was terrified. Dad, he told me as we prepared his modest apartment for the girls' visit, what if they can't forgive me? What if they see me as nothing more than the man who destroyed their family? I watched him arrange photos of their childhood, pictures he'd saved through prison, bankruptcy, and years of separation, with the careful attention of someone handling precious artifacts. Blake, you've spent 7 years becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. Whether they choose to forgive you isn't something you can control, but you can show them who you've become and let them decide for themselves. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Blake opened it to reveal two young women who looked remarkably like Eleanor had at their age. Tall, confident, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. They'd inherited their grandmother's strength rather than their mother's entitlement, shaped by adversity into people of genuine character. "Hello, Dad," Lily said quietly. The word Dad hung in the air like a question, not hostile, but tentative, testing whether the title still applied after 7 years of absence. "Lily." "Rose." Blake's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance." They sat in his simple living room, furnished with pieces from thrift stores and garage sales, decorated with awards from the foundation and photos of the entrepreneurs he'd helped, and began the most important conversation of Blake's life. "We read about what happened," Rose said, her voice carefully neutral. "The trial, the fraud charges, everything Mom did. But we want to hear your version." Blake told them everything. His years of entitled behavior, his manipulation of my generosity, his weakness in the face of Vanessa's schemes. He didn't minimize his role or blame others for his choices. He accepted complete responsibility for the choices that had destroyed their family and nearly destroyed mine. "I was a coward," he said simply. "I knew what your mother was planning was wrong, but I was too weak to stop her and too selfish to walk away from the money. I chose greed over integrity, and you girls paid the price for my cowardice." Lily leaned forward, studying her father's face. "But you did finally tell the truth. You testified against Mom even though it meant going to prison. Only after Grandpa Walter caught us and forced me to choose between doing the right thing and losing everything that mattered. I should have been strong enough to make that choice on my own, years earlier." Rose pulled out a folder filled with newspaper clippings about the foundation's work, Blake's business success, and the entrepreneurs he'd helped. "We've been following your work. Aunt Jennifer showed us the articles about people you've helped start businesses, ex-convicts who've turned their lives around. That's Uncle Harold's legacy, not mine. I'm just trying to pass on what he taught me about the difference between earning something and taking it." "But you could have taken Grandpa Walter's money," Lily pointed out. "After Mom went to prison, after the truth came out, you could have asked for your inheritance. Instead, you chose to earn everything yourself." Blake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Girls, I spent 34 years taking things I hadn't earned. It nearly destroyed me as a person and cost me everything that mattered, including my relationship with you. I never want to be that man again." They talked for 3 hours, the conversation moving from painful history to tentative hopes for the future. Blake showed them Harold's business journals, explained the foundation's mission, and described his work with people seeking second chances through entrepreneurship. "Dad," Rose said finally, "we can't pretend the past didn't happen. You made terrible choices that hurt a lot of people, including us." Blake nodded, bracing himself for the rejection he'd feared for 7 years. "But," Lily continued, "we can see who you've become. The man sitting here isn't the same person who committed those crimes. And we'd like to get to know this version of our father, if you're willing." Blake broke down completely. 7 years of guilt and hope and desperate love pouring out in tears he'd held back since the day they'd been taken away from him. "I'd like nothing more," he whispered, "but I understand if it takes time. I understand if you need to go slowly. I understand if you're never able to fully trust me again." Rose reached over and took his hand, the first physical contact between them in 7 years. "Dad, we've learned some things about forgiveness from watching other people's families. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't serious. It's about choosing to build something new with the person someone has become." "And," Lily added with a smile that reminded Blake painfully of Eleanor, "we're pretty proud of what you've built with your life. The foundation helps people who need second chances, just like you needed one." Over the following months, Blake's relationship with his daughters slowly healed. They visited regularly, volunteered at the foundation, and gradually began calling him Dad without the tentative uncertainty that had marked their reunion. The breakthrough came when Rose was accepted to law school and Lily was offered a position with a nonprofit organization in Chicago. Instead of asking Blake for financial help, they approached him for business advice, treating him as a mentor rather than an ATM. "We want to build our own success," Lily explained during one of their monthly dinners. "You and Grandpa Walter and Uncle Harold taught us that the things you earn yourself are more valuable than the things you inherit." Blake looked at his daughters, strong, independent women who'd overcome childhood trauma to become people of genuine character, and saw the best possible outcome of his redemption journey. "Your grandmother Eleanor would be so proud of you both," he said. "You've become exactly the kind of women she hoped you'd be, strong enough to forgive, wise enough to judge people by their actions rather than their mistakes." 8 years after her conviction, Vanessa was released from prison on parole, and within a week she was back to her old schemes. But the world she returned to was vastly different from the one she'd left behind. Blake's Foundation had become regionally recognized for its work with second-chance entrepreneurs. I had donated most of Harold's inheritance to charitable causes while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle. Lily and Rose were thriving in their chosen careers, having built their success through effort rather than inheritance. Vanessa's first stop was my house. I answered the doorbell to find a woman who looked decades older than her 45 years. Prison had hardened her features and deepened the lines around her eyes, but the predatory calculation in her expression remained unchanged. "Hello, Walter," she said, her voice still carrying that false sweetness that had once fooled me into thinking she cared about family. "I think it's time we had a conversation about my daughter's inheritance." "Your daughters have no inheritance from me," I replied calmly. "They've built their own success through education and hard work. But they're entitled to their share of Harold's money. They're his great-nieces, his blood relatives. They deserve financial support for their futures." I studied Vanessa's face, noting the desperation beneath her attempted manipulation. 8 years in prison had taught her nothing about personal responsibility or genuine change. "Vanessa, your daughters are doing exceptionally well without inherited money. Lily has a full scholarship to law school. Rose has been promoted twice at her nonprofit job. They're building meaningful lives through their own efforts. That's not the point." Her mask slipped completely, revealing the same entitled fury that had driven her original schemes. "That money belongs to this family, and I'm going to make sure my girls get what they deserve. What they deserve is the satisfaction of earning their success. What you deserve is to stay away from my family." Vanessa's eyes blazed with familiar hatred. "Walter, you may have fooled everyone into thinking you're some kind of saint, but I know what you really are. A bitter old man who destroyed my marriage and stole my children's birthright." "I didn't destroy your marriage, Vanessa. You did that when you chose fraud over honesty, manipulation over love, and greed over family." She pulled out her phone and began recording. "I want everyone to see how Walter Anderson treats his own family, how he hoards millions while his granddaughters struggle to pay for college." I smiled calmly at her phone camera. "Hello, viewers. This is Vanessa Anderson, recently released from 8 years in prison for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. She's currently violating her parole by harassing the man she tried to rob, demanding money she never earned for daughters who want nothing to do with her schemes." Vanessa's face went white as she realized I'd turned her manipulation back on her. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Sarah Hartwell has been documenting your parole violation since you were released, contacting me despite a restraining order, attempting to involve Lily and Rose in financial schemes, violating the terms that prohibited you from pursuing claims against Harold's estate." I pulled out my own phone and showed her a text message from Sarah. "Parole officer notified. Vanessa's violation hearing scheduled for Friday. Recommend she cease all contact immediately." The desperation in Vanessa's eyes turned to panic. "Walter, please, I just want what's best for my daughters." "No, you want what's best for yourself. You always have. Your daughters have built something real without your help, and they're better off for it." Vanessa's final card was emotional manipulation. tears, pleas about family loyalty, claims that prison had changed her. But I'd seen genuine change in Blake, and this wasn't it. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "your daughters are remarkable young women who've overcome childhood trauma to become people of character. They've done this despite your influence, not because of it. The best thing you can do for them is leave them alone to continue building their lives without your schemes." She stormed off my porch, threatening lawsuits and public exposure and revenge that would never come. Her parole was revoked 3 days later when she attempted to contact Lily and Rose with claims about their stolen inheritance. Vanessa returned to prison to serve the remainder of her original sentence, plus additional time for parole violations. But more importantly, her daughters were finally free from her toxic influence permanently. "Dad," Lily told Blake during one of their weekly dinners, "we're grateful that Mom is back in prison. That sounds terrible to say about your own mother, but she represents everything we don't want to become." "And Grandpa Walter," Rose added, "we understand now why you chose his guidance over Mom's schemes. He taught you that real wealth comes from building something meaningful, not just accumulating money." Blake looked at his daughters, strong women who'd chosen character over comfort, effort over entitlement, and saw the ultimate vindication of Harold's unconventional inheritance plan. "Your great-uncle Harold believed that money without character is worthless," he said. "You've proven that character without money is priceless." 10 years after the Christmas dinner that changed everything, I stood in the main auditorium of the Eleanor and Harold Anderson Foundation for Second Chances, watching Blake address our largest graduation ceremony yet. 43 entrepreneurs were receiving certificates recognizing their successful completion of our business development program, representing millions of dollars in legitimate economic activity and hundreds of jobs created for people seeking second chances. The graduates were former addicts, ex-convicts, domestic abuse survivors, and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who'd chosen to build rather than take, to earn rather than steal, to create value rather than consume it. They represented everything Harold had envisioned when he'd designed his unconventional inheritance plan. 10 years ago, Blake told the assembled graduates and their families, I was sitting in a prison cell, facing the consequences of a lifetime of selfish choices. I'd stolen from my father, betrayed my family's trust, and nearly destroyed everyone who'd ever loved me. The audience listened with rapt attention. Blake's story had become legendary in entrepreneurial circles, not because of his failures, but because of the methodical way he'd rebuilt his life through genuine effort and service to others. But my Uncle Harold understood something about human nature that I'd never learned, that people don't value what they don't earn. That respect has to be built through actions, not inherited through birth. That genuine change requires genuine sacrifice. Blake gestured toward the graduates. Every person receiving a certificate today has traveled that same journey from taking to earning, from entitlement to effort, from selfishness to service. You've proven that it's never too late to choose who you want to become. In the audience, I spotted familiar faces that told the story of our foundation's impact. Maria Santos, now running a multi-county cleaning service that employed 37 people in recovery. James Wilson, whose automotive repair shops had expanded to 4 locations and provided training for dozens of former addicts. Sarah Martinez, whose catering company had become one of the region's most successful minority-owned businesses. But the face that meant the most to me sat in the front row. Lily Anderson Patterson, Blake's daughter, now a successful attorney specializing in second-chance employment law. She'd married a fellow lawyer she'd met while volunteering at the foundation, and together they'd built a practice dedicated to helping people with criminal records find legitimate employment. Rose sat beside her sister, pregnant with her first child, and glowing with the satisfaction of meaningful work. She'd become the foundation's director of program development, designing initiatives that helped entrepreneurs scale their businesses while maintaining their commitment to social responsibility. Dad, Blake said, gesturing toward me, would you like to say a few words to our graduates? I walked to the podium slowly, my 82-year-old legs protesting, but my spirit energized by the room full of people who'd chosen redemption over resentment, effort over entitlement. 10 years ago, I began, My family was destroyed by greed, manipulation, and the toxic belief that money should be inherited rather than earned. Today, that same family has been rebuilt through the understanding that genuine wealth comes from creating value for others. I looked out at the graduates, seeing in their faces the same determination that had transformed Blake from an entitled child into a man of character. Harold Anderson, the man whose vision created this foundation, started his first business with $800 and a credit card. He built his fortune through 40 years of 18-hour days, disciplined investing, and relentless focus on solving real problems for real people. The audience was completely silent, understanding they were hearing the origin story of the principles that had guided their own transformations. Harold left us his money not as a gift, but as a test. He wanted to see if we could learn to create value instead of just consuming it, to build rather than take, to serve rather than just accumulate. I paused, looking directly at Blake, whose eyes were filled with tears of gratitude and pride. Every graduate here today has passed that test. You've proven that character matters more than capital, that effort trumps entitlement, and that the most valuable inheritance you can leave your children is the example of a life lived with purpose and integrity. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but more importantly, I saw in the faces of our graduates the same understanding that had transformed my son, that genuine success isn't about what you take from the world, but what you give to it. After the ceremony, Blake and I walked through the foundation's headquarters, past offices filled with staff members who were themselves graduates of our programs, through classrooms where the next generation of second-chance entrepreneurs were learning Harold's principles. "Dad," Blake said, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." "What's that?" "Thank you. For not giving up on me when I deserved to be abandoned. For teaching me the difference between enabling and loving. For showing me that redemption is possible but only through genuine effort and genuine change." I thought of Eleanor, who'd always believed Blake had good inside him, and Harold, who designed an inheritance plan that would either destroy or redeem the people who received it. "Blake, you thanked me by becoming the man your mother and uncle always believed you could be. You've proven that it's never too late to choose who you want to become." We stood together in the Foundation's main conference room, surrounded by photos of hundreds of entrepreneurs who'd rebuilt their lives through the principles Harold had discovered, and Blake had learned to teach. "What's next?" Blake asked. "What's next is that you continue this work long after I'm gone. You train others to carry forward Harold's vision. You ensure that second chances remain available for people who are genuinely committed to change." Blake nodded solemnly. "And the Foundation? Will it survive after you and I are gone?" I smiled, thinking of Lily and Rose, who'd already expressed interest in eventually leading the Foundation, and the dozens of graduates who'd become successful enough to fund similar programs in their own communities. "Blake, the Foundation isn't about buildings or bank accounts. It's about the principle that people can change if they're willing to do the work required for genuine transformation. That principle will survive as long as there are people who believe redemption is possible through effort and service." That evening, I sat in my study reading Harold's original letter, the one that had started this entire journey toward understanding the difference between inherited wealth and earned respect. His words seemed prophetic now. "Walter, the greatest gift we can give to people we love isn't money. It's the opportunity to discover their own strength, their own character, their own capacity to build something meaningful. Money that isn't earned is usually money that isn't valued, but success that comes through genuine effort becomes the foundation for a life of purpose and dignity." Outside my window, autumn was painting Iowa in shades of gold and crimson. Inside my house, I was surrounded by photos of a family that had been broken by greed and rebuilt through understanding what genuine love requires. Blake had become the son Eleanor and I had always hoped he'd be, not because we'd enabled his weaknesses, but because we'd finally learned to challenge his strengths. His daughters had become women of character, despite childhood trauma, because they'd learned to value effort over inheritance. The Foundation would continue long after we were gone, because its principles were sound and its mission was essential. Harold's unconventional inheritance plan had worked exactly as he'd intended. Not by giving us money, but by teaching us how to earn the things that money can't buy: respect, character, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of a life lived in service to something greater than ourselves. The $15 million that had once seemed so important was just paper and numbers. The real inheritance, the knowledge of how to build something meaningful from nothing, was priceless and permanent. 15 years after the Christmas that changed everything, I passed away peacefully in my sleep at the age of 87, surrounded by a family I was finally proud to call my own. Blake found me the next morning when he came for our weekly breakfast, Harold's business journal open on my nightstand to the page about building lasting legacies. My funeral was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. The church was packed not just with relatives and neighbors, but with hundreds of entrepreneurs whose lives had been transformed by the foundation's work. Former addicts, ex-convicts, domestic abuse survivors, and disadvantaged youth, all now successful business owners who credited Harold's principles and Blake's mentorship with their redemption. Walter Anderson, Blake said during his eulogy, taught me that the greatest inheritance a father can leave his children isn't money. It's the example of a life lived with integrity, courage, and service to others. He told the assembled mourners about my 40-year engineering career, my dedication to Eleanor during her final illness, my patient support of his own journey from entitlement to earned respect. He could have given up on me when I betrayed his trust, Blake continued, his voice strong despite his tears. He could have written me off as a lost cause when I chose greed over family. Instead, he chose to love me enough to hold me accountable, to challenge me to become better, and to wait for me to find the strength I always had inside me. Lily and Rose spoke about their grandfather's influence on their lives, how he'd shown them that genuine success comes from building rather than taking, from earning rather than inheriting. Grandpa Walter never gave us money, Lily said. Instead, he gave us something more valuable: the knowledge that we were capable of building our own success through education, effort, and integrity. The foundation Blake now led had grown beyond anything Harold had originally envisioned. With offices in 12 states and partnerships with major universities, it had helped over 3,000 entrepreneurs start legitimate businesses, creating tens of thousands of jobs and generating hundreds of millions in economic activity. But more importantly, it had proven Harold's central thesis, that people who earn their success through genuine effort value it more highly and use it more responsibly than those who inherit wealth without understanding its true cost. Blake's own software company had grown into a major regional employer, but he'd structured it as a benefit corporation, dedicating a portion of profits to the foundation and prioritizing employee development over maximum returns. His daughters had joined him as partners, creating a family business built on service rather than exploitation. Vanessa, still serving her extended prison sentence, had become a cautionary tale studied in business ethics courses, an example of how entitlement and manipulation ultimately destroy the very things they're intended to preserve. My own estate was modest by choice. Having given away most of Harold's inheritance to charitable causes, I left Blake and his daughters a comfortable but not extravagant sum, along with something more valuable: a family legacy of character, service, and earned respect. The Harold and Eleanor Anderson Foundation for Second Chances continued to thrive under Blake's leadership, guided by the principles that had transformed our family. Wealth without character is worthless. Respect must be earned through actions, not inherited through blood. The most valuable things in life cannot be purchased, only built through genuine effort. Redemption is always possible for those willing to do the work required for real change. The greatest inheritance parents can leave children is the example of a life lived with purpose and integrity. Years later, when business schools studied our family's story, they would focus on Harold's innovative approach to wealth transfer, using inheritance as a tool for character development rather than just financial security. They would analyze Blake's transformation from entitled heir to successful entrepreneur and mentor. But for those of us who lived through it, the real lesson was simpler and more profound. That love sometimes requires saying no. that the hardest gifts to give are challenges rather than comforts, and that the most valuable inheritances are the ones that must be earned. In the end, Harold's $15 million had accomplished exactly what he'd intended, not by making us wealthy, but by teaching us how to create wealth through genuine value creation, not by solving our problems, but by giving us the tools to solve them ourselves, not by providing security, but by helping us develop the character necessary for true security. The money was just paper. The lessons were permanent. And in small towns across the Midwest, former addicts were running successful businesses. Ex-convicts were employing dozens of people in legitimate enterprises. And disadvantaged youth were building better lives through entrepreneurship and hard work. Harold's unconventional inheritance plan had created something far more valuable than individual wealth. It had created a sustainable system for transforming lives through the proven principles of effort, accountability, and service to others. The foundation continues its work today, led by Lily and Rose, who've expanded its mission to include programs for at-risk youth, veterans transitioning to civilian careers, and immigrants seeking to build businesses in their new country. They understand, as their father learned and their great-uncle Harold always knew, that the greatest gift we can give to people we love isn't what we can do for them. It's helping them discover what they can do for themselves. That's the real inheritance. That's the legacy that matters. And that's the lesson that transforms not just individuals but entire communities, one second chance at a time. Thank you for reading this story of family redemption and the true meaning of inheritance. If this tale moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, the most valuable things in life aren't inherited, they're earned through character, effort, and service to others. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. We love connecting with viewers from all across the world who understand that real wealth comes from building something meaningful rather than just accumulating money.